the meeting.
I'd like to call the February 28th Board of Education meeting to order, recognizing a quorum. Has everybody had a chance to look at the agenda?
Yes.
Questions, comments? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Lori?
Oh, aye.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
Seeing none opposed, it's approved. As we do at the beginning and end of every meeting, we have an opportunity for comments from the public. Is there anybody from the public who would like to speak? Okay, seeing none, we move on to the consent agenda. Has everybody had a chance to look at the consent agenda?
Yes. Yes.
Questions, comments? May I please have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion?
It's gonna be a long night.
Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
None opposed. Board Chair's report. We have a full agenda this evening, and obviously what's looming in all of our minds is the unknown, and the unknown of what Hartford's ultimately going to do. But we are at a position this evening where we need to approve a budget based on our best possible knowledge at this point. And Hartford has not actually handed down any specific edicts. So I want us to keep that in mind. And recognizing that Glenn is not here this evening, I would like to point out that our boys basketball team is currently playing in, I believe it's New Fairfield,
Yes, against Trumbull, I think.
against Trumbull, and go Warriors.
Fair.
Dr. Smith?
For the record, go Warriors.
Well, also, our Model Congress, Bob can probably, they had some great victories, right, Bob?
Some recent success,
Yes.
yeah, last weekend.
Wonderful.
Very, very well. Many students taking first place and placing, so outstanding co-curricular performance again. Credit to all the students, Ken Dunaj and co.
Awesome.
Great.
Please.
I have several items. So first, earlier today, we received from the State Department of Education the Next Generation Accountability Index results. I have not had time. They appeared in my inbox just before noon, and I didn't even sit down until about 45 minutes ago to begin to unpack them. But I did learn, I think, one important detail, and that is Wilton High School was recognized as a school of distinction. One of only 5 high schools in the state recognized for high performance on this index, so we want to congratulate folks at Wilton High for the great work. And you can expect, once we've had a chance to unpack this report and what it means, we'll come back with a detailed presentation. Because it's changed even from last year. So I have to look forward to that. Along the same lines of congratulations, I wanted to just take a moment and recognize our Poetry Out Loud winners. Earlier this month, the high school held its annual Poetry Out Loud competition, which, if you've seen it, you may remember we had one of the winners here a year or so ago, and it's fabulous. I didn't get to observe it this year, but we want to recognize and congratulate freshman Sarah Schneidman, who is designated second runner-up, freshman Solomon Wozniak, who is designated first runner-up, and the Wilton High School 2017 champion junior Haley McHugh, who will be representing Wilton, I think it's this Saturday, Bob, at the state championship. So congratulations to those 3 for the great work, and we look forward to it.
We had a couple of them actually recite their poems to our entire faculty at the most recent faculty meeting. It was very well received, and we all would have been very proud of the students.
Great. As you know, over the last week or so, Chuck and I have begun to engage in conversations with parents and with faculties to address some of the concerns that were raised initially in that anonymous letter, and that some of the concerns have been percolating among parents and I think among teachers for some time. So it's been really constructive, I would say, so far. So over the last week or so, we've met with parents at Middlebrook, at Cider Mill, at the high school. We had an evening last week that was open for any parent or community member who was able to attend. The Miller Driscoll parent session was rescheduled because we had a snow day, I think the day it was planned. And we've met with the faculties from the high school. We're meeting with the Cider Mill folks from last year. There are a few themes that have emerged the purpose of the meetings was to respond to questions and listen to concerns about the various initiatives underway. And I think that's what some people seem to be missing, is just a connection to the big picture and how it relates to their everyday work and how some of these come together. And in some cases, the rationale for some of the decisions that we've made. So out of that, it became very clear that there was a desire for more communication, both among the parents as well as among the faculty, about the work and about the rationale, changes in curriculum, the instructional shifts that are underway, particularly in math and language arts, as well as a desire for different mechanisms to provide input before we launch any new changes. There was also, I think, concern echoed through all of those conversations about the potential impact of a lean budget on top of previous lean budgets, and what it could mean if our budget is taken down either locally or as a result of state cuts. So I think, Chuck can speak for himself, but I think we've debriefed after all of them, found them to be constructive. I think we've got some great input about how we can move forward and really help better support staff, and then connect some parents to information. So we're going to continue those conversations on a more routine basis, both with parents and with staff, and then looking at whatever new structures we can provide to help just that routine communication. So I'll continue to update you as we move forward. The last item. Do you want to add anything?
No, I mean, this is something that I did as a principal with both parents and staff, and it goes a long way in terms of making connections with both of those groups, and again, a good way for them to have a voice in what's happening. So I think it's gone a long way in terms of, again, helping them to make better connections with the two of us.
Yeah. I shared with Chris just a moment ago, and Bruce, I'm going to leave this with you. I had a meeting earlier today with a woman, Katie Roy, who is the executive director of the Connecticut School Finance Project. Her team has put together a proposal to create a state funding cooperative to support districts in meeting special education costs. Think of it as kind of a large insurance pool. The theory behind it is they kind of look at changes at the aggregate level and pool funds, and then help districts through this cooperative to manage the local volatility that we all experience year over year. It's very, very well put together. It's thoughtful. You look at it and you look at what it could mean for a community like ours if it came to fruition, and it's almost too good to be true. We're talking about 100% reimbursement in our funding, which we haven't seen in years. So, again, very interesting. Katie has spent the last several months going around the state meeting with superintendents, very open to talking to boards of education. So I thought we'd start at the Business Operations Committee and take a look at it, and then decide, if this is something we want to pursue further. I actually think there is a bill pending in front of the Education Committee that speaks to special education financing. So this is, in the coming weeks, there's probably going to be a lot more discussion about this all over the place. So I think that's how we'll proceed, and we'll continue to update the board.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
On to other committee reports. Chris, anything to report?
So we did have an operations committee meeting on the 23rd. The materials were posted. I think minutes are in development, and Glenn will have those done shortly. Spent a fair amount of time in a discussion around HR matters. There was a thorough report provided by Maria on HR matters that took up the bulk of our time. We also spent time on building use review, and I think there'll be some recommendations on changes to the program for seeking reimbursement to the extent we lend or lease out our facilities. There was a recommendation from the administration on a facility use study engagement, but I don't see that on the agenda.
Next Thursday.
It'll be on next Thursday's
Correct.
meeting. Okay, so we'll have a recommendation to the board at that point in time to engage a firm to conduct a facility use study. So that'll come to our next meeting. And we had a short conversation about some upcoming policies that are on the agenda tonight for review and discuss.
Wonderful, thank you. Laura?
So I have a couple of things that I haven't reported on the PTA. The PTAs, mostly because I have been a delinquent board member. They are plowing ahead, and I just was thinking about this as Chuck and Kevin visited them and spoke with them as just a plug to go out, because every meeting has the principal is there and there's a teacher there as well as other parents, and you learn a lot. I mean, I always have learned a lot, even as a Board of Ed member. It's a great way to engage, and I know, like, last year, Jen, I'm going to start but she would have people like, what's up with Words Their Way, and someone would come and demonstrate it. So you really learn a lot. So to just the community and the parents, they're great organizations, and they're not huge anymore, but so just want you all to know that PTAs are still doing an important service. And then we had to cancel our last teaching and learning committee because I wasn't in town, but the science curriculum review cycle started off on Friday, and the science and math coaches and Julie Wojciechowski as the curriculum coordinator, as well as teachers and building administrators were there, and Chuck ran it. You have it down. It's very productive. And parents, and so I'm just always impressed with the staff that are so patient with me, and the parents actually are experts, they're kind of science people, and I was just like, what's this? But it was very interesting, and I'm excited to do this, and we're going to start another one next week, so for social emotional
Wonderful.
needs. So yeah.
Thank you. Laura? Chris?
Unfortunately, we had to cancel our policy committee because of illness.
That's okay. We have quite a few policies that we can talk about
We have a lot of
tonight on
policies.
the agenda.
Right.
We move on now to the preschool presentation.
Great, so we're going to invite Sharon D'Angelo and Kathy Kuhn and some other members of our committee who are going to take us through a conversation about our preschool.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Just for the good of the order, start with introductions, please.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
We were gonna wait till we get them. Do you want me to do it? Sharon, we couldn't make the clicker work, sorry. We're clicker challenged, so we need some clicker help, so. All right, so I'll introduce our group. This is Sharon D'Angelo, she's the Assistant Director of Special Education. I'm Kathy Kuhn, the principal of Miller Driscoll. This is Bernadette Hess, who is our preschool PPT facilitator. And let me just give an extra shout out to Bernadette. Again, most of the credit goes to her for the work that we've done in the preschool this year. It's truly amazing. And then at the end, this is Ashley Krause, who's one of our parents of one of our current preschool students and former preschool students. So she's going to be sharing her perspective. So really, you'll just want to hear from her, but we're going to give you some other info as we go. So we consider tonight a celebration. Lucille, go ahead. We consider tonight a celebration of what we do for our youngest learners, and so we're going to frame everything in that way. And I would say the first thing that we're here to celebrate is the fact that we really have changed Miller Driscoll from preschool over here and Miller Driscoll over here to Miller Driscoll pre-K to 2 school. So that's been a huge transformation, and I think, with our construction, with our reconfiguration of our facilities, that's been a great step that we have taken to, again, look at it from the whole, pre-K to 2. And my barometer for measuring whether that's been successful or not is when I go to meetings and people talk about either Miller Driscoll or even our programs K to 12. I used to have to remind them a lot, pre-K to 12 or pre-K to 2, and I have to do that less and less often. So I think it's starting to, it's starting to solidify. So, all right, click away. We need like the film strip. Bing, so this is just an overview of our Miller Driscoll Early Learning Center. And obviously you can read it, but I just wanted to point out a few words. We're really good at unpacking things in education, so when we unpack this overview, we look at words like inclusive, individualized, challenging for each of the students, but yet in that very supportive environment. So that's what we like to foster. All right, and then here's our vision. So this was a vision that was done, we call it BC, before Kuhn. but something that helped to guide our work all along the way. So the whole time with this vision in mind, what we decided to do partway through the school year, I think around November, was to put together a preschool planning committee. And so all of us sitting here were on that preschool planning committee. We had different stakeholders from the preschool team, so a preschool teacher, some related service people, speech and language. Laura came to.
One meeting.
That's all right, it was very memorable. Came to one of our meetings, and what we did was we divided up into some subcommittees and looked at some different things. So just the identity of the preschool, what would our outreach to the community be for the preschool. We had a group of people who went to do preschool visits in other towns. We did some research on the environment, and then we also looked at the curriculum, which we'll talk about later on. And based on all of that information, we formed a list of recommendations that we then shared with Central Office Administration.
For those of you watching from home, we got a report that the sound is going in and out. I've asked the AV folks to look into it. So,
Okay, so the next slide brings us to basically what drives us in education, I think, is always what we know is best for students, and that's why we have our preschool, and we know that early education is the best thing for our students. But of course, as with everything education, there are laws, federal and state guidelines for us to go by. As far as our students that are 3, 4, and 5 years old, we do have federal law, IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which really drives where we go with our 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. It drives us to do a few different things. Something called Child Find, which is to begin with an identification of students that may or may not have a disability. So in addition to identifying them, there's the evaluation piece. And then from the evaluation piece, there is a continuum of services that we must provide for them. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is governed by, what we govern it by is our local and regional state school districts. We provide the services for these children. So we are the ones doing the identification, the evaluation, and we are providing the services for them, whether it's just an itinerant service in the area of speech and language, occupational therapy, or physical therapy, or right along the continuum to a classroom type setting where they're going to receive their special education. This slide just kind of goes through some of the technicality of IDEA and state law, and you can read through that. It's kind of the foundation of where we go. The next slide, if you look, talks about LRE, which is least restrictive environment in Connecticut. Again, this is a slide that you can read through, and it really describes very well, I think, what least restrictive environment means for our littles. As we call them. Our littles need a continuum of services, and they also need to, we need to provide these services amongst their typical peers. And it's a requirement in federal law that students with disabilities receive their education to the maximum extent appropriate with children that do not have disabilities. And this is something that drives us. With our current enrollment, we have students, upwards of 20 some odd identified right now that do require these services, and so in order to have them have the experience with typical peers, we bring the typical peers to us and we create the preschool that we have. If you take a look at the link that's on here, it kind of goes through a little bit more in detail, but we just kind of wanted to outline that piece of why we have what we have. And then I think the next slide is just.
Do you want to talk a little bit about preschools in other areas and how they're provided?
So we did survey 97% of the districts that we surveyed, including all of Fairfield County, do provide an integrated preschool, which means they do have both typicals and identified students together. A reverse mainstream situation is one in which we have a 50-50 ratio between children that are identified with services and children that are identified as typical developing peers, and that's what we strive for. And again, that's so all of Fairfield County, but then 97% of the districts that we contacted, and I think it was 93 districts all provide their services in this way. Some of the ones that do not provide the services in this way are very small districts that might not have the numbers in order to create this, so they have to do a little bit more regional grouping of their students.
So Sharon, can I just interject, just for the benefit of the board and people listening? So there's some questions that have come up about preschool and what is our obligation under statute about providing preschool. And so there is no state law or federal law that says school districts must provide preschool. However, what the law says, as Sharon just described, is we have to meet the mandates of IDEA, which include child find providing services beginning age 3 and providing the least restrictive environment, which is the reverse mainstream environment. It is the rationale for our district and many other districts for providing an integrated preschool program. So, there was I think some confusion about what our obligation is and then, what we're required to spend on it. So, what we have found, and these guys can take you through some greater detail, is these programs are popular because it is the most cost-effective way to provide services to students at this age level who have service requirements per IEPs. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you.
Very well said.
So why do we want to intervene early? The state of Connecticut provides birth to 3 services. So when a child turns 3, then our preschool takes over. And if a child is not exited birth to 3 at age 3, they come to us. And again, I'm not gonna read this, but there's lots and lots of research. There's referenced on the last slide. You can look and if you're curious to learn more, but about the brain and how the brain is so flexible, and the earlier you intervene, the better. It's cost effective to intervene early on, which I know we're all interested in. Or cost effectiveness, and then high quality intervention can improve outcomes for children, and like Sharon said, our local school districts at the age from 3 to 5 are required to provide the services. Kathy's going to talk about the continuum of child development and a little bit in our standards. So our our early learning center model. We have preschool classrooms that are staffed with teachers that are dual certified, so in regular ed and special ed. Our goal next year is to have class size no bigger than 15. We think we're going to be about 12 to 15. Like Kathy said, we're a pre-K through 2nd grade school, so our youngest, our littles, are going to art, music, and next year PE with the same teachers that they will have until they graduate Miller Driscoll, which has been a huge change and a really exciting one. The kids are really connected to Miller Driscoll. We looked at the hours. Currently, we have 2 half days offered, 9 to 11:30, and then 1 to 3:30, with some children staying the entire day. Next year, for continuity, delivery of service, and what we found was best for kids, time-wise, everyone's staying from 9 to 1:15, and when you're 4, there'll be 2 extended days offered, Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we really looked at the hours of a lot of different schools, and then the time that we had our children in school and the services that we could provide during that very short time some of them were there. So we're really excited about that.
Again, just to introduce myself, my name is Ashley Krause. I'm a parent of a 1st grader at Miller Driscoll and a preschooler at the preschool. It's great to be here. This is my first Board of Education meeting. I'm usually home doing that time, so this is such a better, more relaxing.
Whoa. That could be the best compliment you guys have ever had.
Exactly. But in all seriousness, we've had an amazing experience with the program. We found ourselves there for the first time when my 1st grader came through as in his final year of preschool, before heading to kindergarten, and then my current preschool will be there for 2 years before I'm going off to kindergarten. And the impact that the program has had on my kids has been tremendous. So it's especially an honor for me to be here tonight to talk to you about it. What really attracted us to this preschool program as sort of parents would be a couple of things. I think the key thing for us was the individualized learning experience that's offered to all children, regardless of need. And we've seen that play out in the classroom on a daily basis, weekly basis, and just seeing how great the teachers do at tailoring kind of with their lessons and whatnot to each individual child was something that really drew us to the program. We thought would be really beneficial for our kids. I think the quality and the background of everyone who's there was another thing, from the teachers to the paraprofessionals to the administrators. From the moment we were engaged with the preschool for our older son, we were really drawn to just such a warm and welcoming environment, and to what we felt would be kind of the best education for them heading off to kindergarten. The community itself from the start was warm and welcoming. I think from the first moment we set foot into the preschool for our very first meeting, we were really embraced by a lot of the other parents of kids who had been through the program before. And, you know, when you kind of combine all those things together, I think it's a no-brainer. That's the type of community you want for your preschooler. It's a little daunting sending your little ones off for the first time, and it's nice when you can send them somewhere that you're just really comfortable on all fronts. I think as I think ahead to the program, if we think of all the features that are being added for the upcoming year, those are really just the icing on the cake. The amazing facilities that they're going to be in next year. Access to all, like you said, all the specials from art, music, gym, library, learning commons, and just having the continuity as they head off to kindergarten. You know, those things are just an added bonus, as at least for me as a parent. But you know, I think at the end of the day, what the slide says is, what does my child gain from this? And I think it's, you know, as a parent, you want to feel most comfortable, but you also want to see how that plays out with your children. And you know, I think all children, again, regardless of need, greatly benefit from the individualized learning experience that the preschool program offers, and I'd probably put that at the top of my list. I think the access to the exceptional teachers and paraprofessionals that are there is a close second. I think the fact that all teachers have both the regular education and the special education background is something that's beneficial, whether you are a child that attends the preschool with an IEP, or a child that's there as a typically developing child. I can think of a number of ways that it's impacted my children, and they don't have to be, you know, great, big, huge ways on a day-to-day basis. It's just really in the more subtle ways that I think the classroom is managed. And it's something that I think, having experienced multiple programs in town, and I think we've had experience at 4 amazing preschools in this town, I have seen the personalized aspect of this preschool be something that was greatly beneficial to my kids. I think, again, having access to some of these specials, and in particular what that means for exposure to the broader elementary school, and how there's a tremendous amount of continuity for kids from preschool to kindergarten. I know, experiencing sort of the kindergarten transition with a lot of my friends, it's very daunting sending your children off to kindergarten. It feels so overwhelming. And the reality is, for us, when my oldest went off, it was kind of like every other day. I mean, it was what we knew and what we were comfortable with, and he was excited, and we kind of got the kinks out of the way early on before he even maybe knew that there was something to be nervous about. And kindergarten for us was just a seamless transition, and I think that's something that is just so tremendous, and especially now with how integrated the program is. I mean, when my oldest went through the program, it was still relatively separate, and even with that, he was just ready to go come kindergarten. I think that's something that's just tremendous for our preschoolers. And I think, you know, lastly, there's no really way to quantify this, but I do see with a lot of the kids who go through this program just a certain empathy and understanding, or patience, just in general. And I think that is something that is great heading off to kindergarten, especially when you go from a classroom where you have, you know, half of the kids may have an IEP and half don't, to a classroom where there's, you know, fewer kids per classroom that have an IEP. I think it's great for our kids, and I've seen it play out with mine, just to have a respect for different learning styles and different, you know, types of ways of thinking. And I think, you know, expanding it to life, I mean, whether it's in school, on the sports field, or in the working world, I think starting at a young age, learning that there are, you know, different types of personalities and learners, and you know, people out there is a great thing, and I think the school does an amazing job of instilling that in the littlest ones, even if they don't know it's really being instilled in them at that age. You know, at the end of the day, I think it's an amazing community at the school, and the kids know how cared for they are. And I still love that my first grader walks down the hall, and you know, people he interacted with at the preschool, you know, ask him how he's doing and ask him what first grade is, and he's known there, and I love that. And it's made our broader experience at the elementary school just wonderful. So we've been so happy with the program.
Thank you.
Great. So like Ashley said, a big part of the program is individualizing the instruction for the kids. So when we look at instruction, at the preschool level, we have something called the Connecticut Early Learning and Development Standards. And it's sort of the common core of preschool, for lack of a better name. So if you click the next slide, Lucille, this is a graphic that shows the continuum. The middle, the blue circle is birth to 3, and there are, again, standards around birth to 3. Oh, no, there we go. And the green are the standards for our 3 to 5-year-olds, and then you can see the red on the outside shows the standards in the Common Core. And so what I wanted to do, the early learning and development standards are very big and very thick, but I wanted to show you an example. So I made a copy from each of the strands. You're each going to get a different strand, of course. I have to get up and move around some way, right, Laura?
This is like Kathy Coon.
You're gonna each get a different strand, but you're gonna see that what this does is it outlines a progression of skills from the earliest months, so 0 to 4 months. You probably don't need this, but 0 to 4 months, all the way up to 4 to 5 years of age. And when Ashley talks about individualizing instruction, a lot of people would say, oh my gosh, how do you even do that with a bunch of little kids? But if you look across this progression, the teachers are very good at pinpointing where kids are in these different strands and then designing their instruction to move them along that progression. And again, I'm giving you a very small sample, but I just want you to see, you know, sort of what it is that they're looking at and what some of the information they're gathering. I think I gave Laura the social emotional one, which is one of my most favorites. And so when there's a strand on regulating your emotions and behavior, and when you're 0 to 6 months, it's okay if you're being comforted by a familiar adult, and you can suck your thumb or your fist or your pacifier. But by the time a kid gets to 4 or 5, we really want them to demonstrate increased ability to consider the social standards of the environment when responding to their emotional state. I know some adults that still need to work on that, but I'm just saying, it's like you can see how the progression goes, and kids can fall anywhere in that progression and then be supported to move to the next level.
When we get to numbers, because we always love numbers and charts, we have our staffing numbers up here. We took a look back a few years, starting with 2015 and 16. The numbers in front of you are what we had in place at that time as far as physical therapy, speech and language, occupational therapy, psychologists, social workers, and paraprofessionals. So if we take a look, there were 4 classrooms at the time, and 1.8 physical therapists, 2.8 speech. I don't have to read them all down to you, but if you take a shift over to 2016-17, you can see where we currently are with 3 teachers. If you take a look at the physical therapy, we've gone down to 0.4. Speech has remained the same. Occupational therapy went down 0.5. And then our psychologist is the same, and then social workers. I think one of the biggest changes we have, you see in the paraprofessionals, obviously gone down from 11.7 to 7 paraprofessionals. At the time last year and currently, we still have adaptive PE in place, and then moving into next year, we have our proposed numbers. Right now, we're looking at 3 to 4 classrooms, the 0.4 PT, down to 2.0 speech, and then 1.0 OT psychologist, and a 0.2 social worker. We're down 6 to 6.8 paraprofessionals. One of the ways in which we kind of progressed through is by taking the DMC report and really working through some of the recommendations as far as
maximizing our staff time and grouping students together so that they can have that experience of learning, with another child. So going from individual sessions to group sessions and things like that. Also making sure that all the time we have was well spent. So whereas we changed some of the hours of the preschool, we're incorporating more of the social piece into the lunch, into the snack time, and we're utilizing our staff in a very effective way. And again, taking some of the recommendations of contact time with students and grouping, we've been able to make that progression down with some of our FTE for the staff. And I'm really excited about that. The music and art and PE, we're utilizing our pre-K2 staff, so it's not a separate entity anymore. We're utilizing the teachers from K2 to provide those services. We've been able to embed that with Kathy's amazing scheduling skills that she's been working on. It's really amazing how we've been able to do that, and now these students will be able to have the same teachers through. By the time they're in kindergarten, they're going to know these teachers, and the teachers are going to know them, and what a great experience for them. So.
It's a confidence builder, and also it's important to point out that the model going forward is going to be one teacher and 2 paraprofessionals. So while that number of paras has really decreased, and there'll be 1 teacher and 2 paras in class.
And that's another piece of what we're looking at with that is fostering independence with our students, even at that young age, with the adults that are in place, just making sure that we are allowing them to grow on their own and stumble a little if they need to, but really with the adults in the room providing a foundation for help, but then allowing the students really to learn a little bit more independently too, and that's another great celebration as far as the adults and the paraprofessionals. If you go to the next slide, we have our enrollment and tuition, and again, we went back to 2015-16, and that sort of breaks down what we had, 42 students, 14 were peer models, and 28 were students identified with an IEP. Itinerant services refer to the students that come only for a related service, such as speech and language, occupational therapy, or physical therapy. And they would come and not participate in an entire day or even a half day. They would come just for those services, the standalone services. As we stand right now, as of February 41, we have three more coming. We currently have 18 peer models and 23 students identified with an IEP, and we have 3 itinerant students coming for related services for a total of 44 students. And then proposed for next year, as we stand right now, we have 40 pending. And we do have 24 peer models, which we're so excited about, and 16 identified students. If you look, we do have a number of students that come through birth to 3 at a revolving sort of staggered way. So as the students are turning to their 3rd birthday, birth to 3 does make referrals. And currently we do have 15 students in that referral process. So as you see the numbers pending for next year at 40, this will significantly change as birth to 3 makes the transition to us. We do the evaluative piece, and if they do qualify, then we will provide them with the continuum of services that they require. So that could change.
So just to be clear, so we currently have 23 students identified, but you said there are 15 in the so that number could balloon to 38?
Correct. So that would be between now and next year. So as I said, it's kind of staggered, so they're not all slated to turn 3 by the end of this year.
Got it.
But by going into next year. So, and again, we just have 1 itinerant student right now. So
that will change.
That will change.
Did we double our tuition? I'm just looking at the 56,000 divided by 18, and then
So we made it. We increased the full day tuition from 6,500 to 7,000, and why this the other numbers were based on some kids were a half day, which was $4,000. Some kids are 3 days, half days. It's very confusing. So we've just provided one choice with the 2 extended days. So it's a minor increase, but it will be more consistent.
Has that been communicated to the parents?
Yes.
And so notwithstanding the substantial increase in cost, the demand has gone up from 18 to 24?
Yes.
Through it.
And best I can tell, the labor costs year over year haven't changed, have they? Roughly speaking.
Roughly speaking.
And the incremental revenue is over $100,000.
Correct.
So if I have the math right, on the margin, we just contribute an extra $100,000 to the spending for the benefit of the rest of the school system.
Correct.
Okay.
And also know
I'm sure it's on record. I got the math right.
And also know there are some other efficiencies, so even though we listed out on the slide previous to this one, the number of staff whose primary job is the preschool, we do have staff though that work primarily in the preschool, but then also help the kids as they transition to kindergarten. So Dr. Adrian Mata is a perfect example, who provides a lot of support in the preschool, but as the kids are transitioning up, there's oftentimes kids that we say, you know what, if you stayed with, you know, little Sharon and definitely Kathy, they would benefit from the transition. Thank you for laughing. So there are efficiencies there too. So we put the people who are in there as their primary position, but we do utilize them throughout the rest of the school. So now it's if you have questions for us, we're happy to answer any questions. We do know it's a packed agenda. We tried to go really fast. Sorry, Chuck. We know you have a lot to do with that, but we're happy to answer any questions.
Is there any truth to that we're taking in non-Wilton residents to the program?
I'm sorry, Christine, what's the question?
Are there non?
We've had questions about taking non-Wilton residents into the program.
Of those 24, are any non-Wilton residents?
No. We currently have one staff member's
Okay.
child who pays tuition.
But if I was a Ridgefield resident and heard about this great new pre-learning school at Miller Driscoll, I couldn't come with my $7,000 and sign up.
It'd be based on, right?
This is a program like all of our other programs
For
for
Wilton
Wilton kids.
kids.
I think
Okay.
there is, in the past, not at the pre-K level, but there are, other times where students have asked to come here from
Right.
other communities, but it's that they pay the full freight.
Okay.
What would we do with these littles if we didn't have this program? And what do you anticipate the cost would be per student?
It's a great question. So, I did talk before about how many we have, so 24 students that we have made the recommendation through our evaluation system that require a school day. So they require special education for upwards of 3 to 5 hours a day. For those students, we would then have to look outside of the district to find somewhere for them to go to receive that special education. Or another option would be to utilize our staff to go to the community preschools to provide those services within the community preschools. So if you had a much smaller number, obviously, I can't think of maybe anything more than 3 or 5 that would be an effective use of time and money or staff. But when you're looking at 20 some odd students that you would have to then transport, work with the preschool settings and then provide the staff to do that, it would be not time effective. It wouldn't be in the best interest of the child because of the transportation piece, and then also just staff wise. And then when you look at least restrictive environment, that's what you would need to look for too. So therefore, that's why we do the reverse mainstream, because in the best interest of these students, we provide it right here in our building, and we bring the community to them. And with that theory in mind, and again, 97% of the districts in Connecticut are doing that. And I think the ones that aren't, it's always due to the size of the school district and being regional and needing to sort of farm out to other neighboring districts. I know Bernadette did look into neighboring towns, like do other towns accept our students for that? And I know
The answer was no.
yeah. So if you
Flat.
were, yeah, for example, to go to Westport or Darien,
New Canaan.
Newchak, Weston, we wouldn't be able to send our students there.
So our most fragile kids
Correct.
at age 3 would have to go to CES in Trumbull?
That's an option. There are depending on the disability and how significant, CES for some of our more significant, there's even further, they would have to go to ACES, even up in New Haven County, or into New York State for some of them. Some of our students are fairly significant and require a full day with intensive instruction and all day with paraprofessional support, things like that. So you're really looking at a pretty significant amount of staffing and time. And then again, we're taking our littles and we're transporting. We don't even like to put our older students on buses up there if we don't have to. We try to find places that are closer to keep them within the community and things. So put a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old on a bus, or to even have to look at a parent and say, I'm sorry, we don't have that here, but I'm gonna send them on the bus up here. I mean, it's tough.
I have a question about the makeup of the class, the typical peers and the ones with the IEPs. Right now, I think the numbers were 24 and 16 projected for next year. So as they age to 3, would a typical peer be able to enter the program at any time during the school year once they turn 3, or are they more on, as like K through 12 is, birthday by the end of December? Are they restricted in that way versus the others?
Right, they're more,
Go ahead, no, you go ahead.
they're more on a typical school year.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that peer number doesn't really change very much.
So that
It's the
24 will
special
probably
ed,
be-
right,
okay.
it's the number of students in special ed that will change, and like Sharon talked about, because of the whole revolving birth to 3, we have to decide if you're gonna get services, and if so, they have to start on your 3rd birthday.
And is that why the 24 is, a much higher number for the beginning of the year versus 16 to allow for the growth in the, okay.
You always, the growth in preschool is always astronomical.
Okay.
Even when you start with low numbers and you see how many turn 3. We did, in some larger districts, they do have wait lists for some of their typical peers. And if that happens and they have to open up another section, because the enrollment is so large, then they can go to that wait list and bring some in mid-year. But otherwise, we like to keep them.
But you get data on the other kids so that you can make an estimate as to how many you're expecting, so that then you can decide how many peer models to accept at the same time. Okay.
Yeah. What's harder to track, Lori, is the in-migration.
Yeah,
we have a lot
of
of
course.
folks who, the kids aren't born here,
Right,
but move
right.
in, and that's, that accounts, I think, roughly for half of our total student population over time, and we generally see an increase at this early childhood level.
And the other piece of it is the referrals from the community preschools.
Right.
So
Right,
students
right.
will be enrolled in a community preschool as a typical, and then the preschool will reach out to us and say, we have concerns about this student, we need you to come look. So we always have a separate line item for that, because we know we have to account for that as well.
So it's not just the kids who are involved in birth to 3, right?
Right.
So that you know those numbers, but you don't know how many numbers are going to come in who haven't been identified as needing intervention.
Yeah, exactly.
What is the average cost of a private preschool, and how did you determine the cost for our typicals?
We looked at what other districts with programs similar to ours were charging, looked at their hours, and we looked at the private preschools, and there's a range. We're actually under all, for the time length of our day, we're under all the community preschools cost-wise.
But comparable to the
But
other
comparable.
public school.
Correct. Yeah.
But fully covering our own costs.
Yes.
And then for the outplacement facilities, such as a cooperative educational services or something like that, then, I think we'd have to look to Dick, but I know, it would be around what we pay when we are outplacing a student. I don't know, is Ann probably?
Roughly
50, because you're also including that transportation cost in that as well, which could be significant if it's up in Trumbull.
So, just to be clear, though, I think you said it's roughly, we're roughly covering our costs with that incremental child. I'm not sure that that's accurate, is it? That it costs us $7,000
Per pupil is not 8,000 in the preschool, and it's because the kids receive a range of services. It's a number. You could simply kind of take the total input and divide by the number of SPED kids and get a per pupil cost. I'm
talking about the typicals, though.
But because of the demand of the program to meet the LRE requirement, no, we do. The portions of their education is subsidized. So that's not. The 7,000 is not the fully loaded cost, I think, is what you're asking.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's just to be clear. That's correct.
Okay, and we want to aim for 1-to-1, correct? We try to aim typical to special education students. So we're 50% above that right now. The question's going to come from the community, so I'm going to ask it. It's a tough question. Are we charging too little, and is that why we have so many students? And if we increase the cost, will that drop the number down to 1-on-1 and give us the ability to staff with fewer staff, or perhaps bring in a little bit more revenue?
Well, I think you have to remember that 24-16 ratio, the 16 is a starting point. So that 16, even between now and the end of the year with the kids coming in from birth to 3, so we're slating 16 for next year, but that number will even increase before the end of this year. And then like Sharon said, we know the kids who are in the birth to 3 program, and that was, what did you say, 15 students currently? So again, who are in referral, so across the span of time, that 16 will continue to grow. And we looked at that to say, you know, in years past, what was the trend, you know, where do we start and where do we end up? So we can always get you those numbers too.
So you anticipate, while we're above 1-to-1 right now, towards the end of the year, we could conceivably be under?
Yeah, I would say not even towards the end of the year, but yeah.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on?
No, thank you.
Nice
very
job,
much.
and thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for taking time away from
Yeah.
bath time.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
We now move on to review and discuss the DMC action plan, an update on SRBI. We're, time-wise, we're about 10 to 8, so we still have a lot to cover.
I will try to be quick. So there's actually two things that
You
I
have
want.
3.5 minutes.
Okay. So there's actually two things I wanted to go over with you tonight that are kind of related. One is an update on the DMC action plan, at least my part of it. And then I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some changes to our comprehensive assessment system, and they are related. So, as you know, a few years ago, we had the District Management Council come in and do a study around special education, and they made a number of recommendations for both general education and special education. And so today I want to go over the part around general education. And their recommendations for general education generally centered around that term we always use, SRBI, scientific research-based interventions. We want to make sure that we are supporting students as much as we can in general education before we make a referral to special education. I think, as you know, a referral rate in special education was high, continues to be a little high at times, and this is one of the strategies to make sure that we're only referring kids who truly demonstrate learning disabilities, not a curriculum disability. We have worked on this for the past several years. Up until this point, we've been putting into place a lot of the foundational pieces, making sure we have the correct staff in place, and that we have all of the policies, procedures, and practices in place, as well as any resources and training for staff. This year, we are at a stage where we want to be able to actually set expectations for how this process will become integrated into a routine part of our practice. So if you'll notice up here, this is our action plan for this year around SRBI. Basically, it's to build the capacity of our staff to implement this system of providing scientific research-based interventions well. And we've developed a number of goals around that. The first one has to do with making sure that our administrators have a very, very deep understanding of what an effective SRBI program looks like, so that they can support the staff and facilitate the process. We also wanted to make sure that all of the structures, resources, and processes were in place in order to effectively review assessment data and reliably identify those students who are in need of intervention and what level of intervention and what type of intervention. We also have a handbook that we developed that we needed to update based upon our learning over the past couple of years. And most importantly, we continue to develop the capacity of our academic interventionists to do several things. Number one, we wanted to make sure that they had the ability and tools necessary to facilitate the actual SRBI meetings using a protocol that I developed. We also wanted to make sure that they could use an intervention framework. Last year, we were very fortunate to receive a grant from the state where we got 10 full days of coaching around SRBI from Diane Dukas. You may remember I used that name. I think Diane may have even been here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I can't remember, she was the former superintendent of
I'm not sure.
uh,
Up the coast.
District Up the Coast. And her work was primarily around developing this intervention framework with the interventionists. And so what this does is it basically catalogs all of the various interventions that can be used with students depending upon their presenting needs. And it clearly delineates the purpose of each intervention. It gives a good description. It talks about the frequency and duration of when it should be administered, how it should be administered, and what group size, as well as the entrance, exit criteria, what the progress monitoring was. The reason we did this is we want to do something called fidelity of implementation. What we had discovered before was that depending upon who the interventionist was, you could get a very different sort of intervention. And that just is not good for kids. Across interventionists, across schools, we want to make sure they're getting a very consistent and coherent intervention program because that's going to ensure good growth. We wanted to make sure that they could use the MAP data and diagnostic assessment information to effectively establish goals and objectives for students. We wanted to make sure that they were developing intervention plans that included all of the components of what is considered to be an effective intervention plan. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that they were following the lesson plan format for interventions that we developed with Diane Dukas. And so we've made very good progress on all of those goals. So what you see up there is the actual detailed action plan by goal, the steps that we took to address each of those goals. And this is actually, we're kind of doing a test run of a new way of reporting progress to you. And I believe this came from something Kevin shared with me that Mr. Straub shared with Kevin, and we wanted to see if this would work.
This doesn't work at all. They have black and white copies in front of them,
I'm
hard
sorry.
copies. No, it's so.
So we're trying
Board
to
docs has color.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah,
say.
no, it's in color electronically.
So what we're trying to do is to kind of give you a quick color code of where we are with the various steps. I don't know why that top line up there is orange. It should be actually green. So we want to give you a sense of, are we on track or have we completed these actions? Have we made some progress? Have we made no progress? And have we had to change the action step?
Basically, we could step all the way to the last page, which is one that says some progress.
Yeah.
Everything else is on track or completed.
And what you'll be able to do is, you notice here, this is the first reporting period, so we have that here, but over time, we'll be reporting progress to you on a regular basis, so you'll be able to see progress over time. Okay? So again, we are on track and have completed almost all of the action steps. There are two at the very end, if you could just scroll to the end, where we're making progress, but I didn't really feel comfortable saying that we were on track yet. The first one had to do with observations of the actual interventionists. Lynn Driver, our SRBI coordinator, has actually been in all of the classrooms with the interventions and observing them. I've made a purposeful decision not to do that yet. This has involved a huge change for our interventionists, and although they're a great group to work with, they're doing unbelievably good work, there's still some level of anxiety around what we're doing. And so, again, I made a conscious decision because when the assistant superintendent comes in and observes you, it creates anxiety. So I have not done any observations yet, but I do plan to do some by the end of the year. The second thing we're making some progress, we have been using a program called RTI Studio, which was very clunky and not user-friendly. We have moved to something that is compatible with another program we use called Power School. It's called Power Analytics and Power Assessment. We have purchased it and we've configured it, but it's not completely configured yet. For whatever reason, the company is having difficulty entering our SBAC data and our F&P data. So we're not quite there yet. I know we will get there, but I didn't want to code this as on track yet because I'm not sure it'll be done by the end of the year. Our map data is all in there, which is what we're primarily using for SRBI. So again, we're making some good progress, but we're not quite there yet. And so I'd be interested to hear what you think of this format of reporting progress, whether it's helpful.
I like it.
In this particular instance.
It works really well.
Other than the black bars, it's very helpful. Despite who suggested it.
Any questions about how we're proceeding?
No, it sounds great.
Sounds great.
Yeah, it sounds wonderful, thank you. But when you say that that you haven't visited the interventionists yet because, your presence, is it your sense that there's complete buy-in among interventionists?
I do meet with them on a monthly basis, and this is the first year that they have actually met as a group and are starting to feel like a program or a department. So I do spend a lot of time with them in meetings. I actually have not gone in and actually observed them.
Okay.
I made the choice that Lynn should do that because Lynn's not their evaluator.
Right.
I'm not their evaluator either, but again, I'm the assistant superintendent. I am an evaluator. So I think they just need to feel a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more secure that they're implementing all of these new programs and have some time to learn before I come in and start giving feedback.
But the building administrators are.
Yes, the building administrators.
So it's not like they're not being evaluated along with the rest of our professional staff.
See, my purpose is really to do a fidelity check. Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? And they're still learning these things, so I'm giving them an opportunity to get that under their belt to feel comfortable before I go in and give feedback.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? Thank you very much. We now move on to the Comprehensive Assessment System update, PSAT.
Yes, so. I'm sorry. No, it's right there.
Right there.
It won't let me, okay. I apologize.
While we're waiting for that, I did receive a note from our technical control booth. They looked into all of the audio streams and didn't see any problems from our end, but they did boost the audio in case that could have been the issue, so they think it might be a Cablevision issue.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Obviously, people at home can't hear what I just said, so.
That's the one that.
You had to click you instead of me. I'm sorry. That's what happened. Click you.
Yeah, click there, no?
And just so you know, Chuck has presented this at Teaching and Learning.
Oh, okay.
He might
In
be.
case you were wondering.
Well, I was.
Look what a cool picture that is that
Yeah.
Chuck uses as
Yeah, it's
his
pretty cool, isn't
profile
it?
picture.
With the district logo.
Can you put it in presentation view, Lucille?
Okay, go up to
So it's
view.
easier to see.
Present.
Perfect, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay. So.
The last presenter took too much time, so you have 2.5 minutes.
Okay. So unfortunately, I have to tell you a little story. So last September, I belong to a thing called the Executive District Leadership Council. It's basically all of the assistant superintendents in Connecticut who get together for professional learning. They sponsored a workshop with the College Board. A guy by the name of Alan Bernstein came to talk about the SAT and the PSAT. As you know, Connecticut made the decision to not give the SBAC anymore in 11th grade, but instead to transition to the Connecticut SAT. That is our summative assessment in 11th grade, not the SBAC. The new SAT, like the SBAC, is aligned to the Common Core. And in this presentation, I went with our two instructional coaches at the high school, Trudy Denton and Eileen Foley. And I have to tell you, I was unbelievably impressed with the level of detail that teachers can get on SAT performance for students. I mean, you can get down to the question level, you can slice and dice the data in all different ways, and really use that information not only to identify students who are struggling, but to make sure that we can set goals and improve the performance for all of the students. As part of that presentation, there were a number of school districts that came to talk about how they have moved towards using the PSAT as their interim benchmark assessments. It was West Hartford, Rocky Hill, and I think it's called the Edwin O. Smith High School, which is part of Region 19.
Up in Stores,
right. Which is all the professors from UConn sent their kids to that school. And they made a very strong argument that this is something that schools in Connecticut should think about moving to. And it persuaded me that we needed to seriously consider this. The coaches also were unbelievably impressed with the level of analysis that they can do on student performance. And in fact, Trudy Denton did a very thorough analysis using the SAT information from the year before to come up with some really great ideas on how to support our teachers in improving the performance of students. Go to the next slide. So I just wanted to frame this for you in terms of why do we do interim benchmark assessments. And basically it's to make sure that we are monitoring student performance towards our summative assessment, and that we are making sure that our resources, not only in terms of materials, but also professional learning, is targeted to where it needs to be, to predict outcomes on state tests, and to help parents understand how they are progressing. Go to the next slide. So why do we want to make this move to the PSAT from MAP? Basically, so let me kind of explain how I'm thinking about this. So for grades 3 through 8, our summative end-of-year accountability test is the SBAC. The MAP is a very good predictor of that because NWEA has done some pretty impressive predictive analyses of it, and it's borne out in our own data. We know if a student scores at a certain level on a MAP, this is what he's going to get on the SBAC. And it gives us very detailed information on what we need to work on if students aren't meeting that benchmark. Now at the high school, because we've switched to the SAT, although it is also aligned to the Common Core, NWEA has not done that predictive analysis as to whether the MAP is aligned to the SAT. But we know very well that the PSAT is directly aligned. So we'll be getting much better information to monitor progress towards that summative assessment. Does that make sense? Okay. They also provide an unbelievable amount of resources for teachers and students depending upon the results. Khan Academy happens to be one of them. So if a student is showing some deficits in certain areas, they have unlimited resources, including Khan Academy, that students can access in order to improve their performance. That third bullet is really important. I'll be honest with you, I think the high school has struggled with the MAP. It's very different than what they're used to, but they are very used to the SAT. And so I think that, just the College Board, the PSAT, speaks a language that high school staff is very familiar with. And it tests things that the high school staff are very comfortable teaching. And it can continue to be used for universal screening purposes. So what will change? So in next year, in 17-18, students in grades 8, 9, and 10 will not take the MAP. But instead, students in grade 8 and 9 will take the PSAT 8-9 in the fall and the spring, and students in grade 10 will take the PSAT 10 in the fall I'm not sure if you're interested in this, but I have some detailed information on exactly what the PSAT is assessing in the areas of reading and writing. All the test questions are multiple choice, and they're based on actual reading passages. They do it at times, use multiple passages, so students need to compare and analyze between two passages. Does include some interpretation of infographics, but no math is required. It's not testing prior content knowledge, and it includes two different tests, the reading and then the writing and language tests. It measures a student's command of the use of evidence, how well they can interpret the meaning of words in context. There is a lot of analysis of texts in history, social studies, and science. Talks about expression of ideas as well as the use of standard English conventions. In terms of math, most of the items are multiple choice, although there are some what are called grid-ins. So students have to figure out a problem, the answer, and then they grid the answer in. It's not a multiple choice. There's both items that they can use a calculator with and items that they cannot use a calculator with. Certainly what we want to look at is procedural fluency, so we don't want to have kids using a calculator when we want to know that they actually know how to do operations. But when we get up into the higher problem solving and applications, they can use calculator for those items. Some of the questions, students will be given a single scenario, and there will be multiple questions related to that scenario. The basic areas of focus in math are algebra, problem solving, data analysis, and advanced math. And that advanced math is manipulation of very complex equations. And again, it measures fluency, conceptual understanding, and applications. All right, so I wanted to explain the scale here. So what you see here is the overall scale that goes from 120 to 800, and you can see where each of these tests falls. So the PSAT 8-9 starts at around 120 and goes to just above 700. The PSA 10 goes from about 150 up to about 750, and then the actual SAT is 200 to 800. I didn't get those numbers quite right, but I'm not wearing my glasses, so.
Did a pretty good job.
Okay. If you could just go back for a minute. The good thing about this test is they set benchmarks for each type, so we can measure how kids are progressing towards meeting the benchmark of the SAT. And this is just the range of scores. It's pretty much a repeat of the prior slide. The range of scores for SAT, PSAT 10, and 8-9. The important thing to understand that this is all the same scale. It's just staggered depending upon the developmental level of the students. I know this is hard to read, but it's kind of a breakdown of the score structure. So you have a total score, which is broken down into evidence-based reading and writing and math. Analysis in science and analysis in social studies and history cross both tests. So some of those items, they can derive a score for those two things from both of those tests. And then things underneath are just the components. Words in context, command of evidence, algebra problem solving. Okay, and you will get scores in all of those areas. Kids will get those. Wanted to give you a time comparison between MAP, PSAT 8-9, and PSA 10 for both ELA and math. If you look at the bottom, MAP takes about 6 hours. The PSAT 8-9 will take about 4.8 hours, and the PSA 10 will take about 5.10. So we've made a little bit of an adjustment in decreasing the amount of time students will be assessed.
That's over the course of the year,
Yes.
so multiple administrations.
Well, yeah, because we do 3
Yeah.
times with the MAP and only twice with the PSAT, but we are adding a grade level. And then finally, a cost comparison between MAP and PSAT. Again, we've added 10th grade. So.
Chuck, one of the things we talked about in TNO was one of the things that we liked about the map is that it not only told you where your student was now, but as a student takes the test and they continue to get questions correct, the test gets progressively harder to
Right.
continue to challenge them, so that we could really see the student's full potential. So we were discussing how that compares with the PSAT.
So the map is adaptive.
Adaptive
You
is
go
the
up
word,
and down.
yes. Mhm.
The SAT is not. But it does give us some very valuable information. And we're gonna be doing it twice a year, so we will be able to see growth.
So we'll see the adaptiveness up through 7th grade.
Yes. That question came up at the College Board, and I think at some point, maybe in the future, the SAT will become more adaptive, but it's not there yet.
Because the interesting thing I think it is that if an 8th or 9th grader scores a perfect score or close to a perfect score, it hasn't measured that student's potential.
Right.
Right.
Good point.
So, just something for us to keep in.
Unreasonable, we're gonna need to do something else with that kid.
Right, well, I'm just saying, because we obviously have national merit scholars in our midst who either score perfect scores or come very close to it. So we have those students among us.
Good. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, I just want to comment on, there's a couple things. One is I think parents will, there's this kind of practice SATs starting in 8th grade, and that's going to be, I think, embraced by a lot of people. And I also want to use this as an example of two things. One is the coach's involvement, like the fact that Chuck took Eileen Foley and Trudy Denton with him, and that what they're getting out of it and how their impact on shaping what we're doing in the classroom and in the schools, but also just an example of our administrators, nothing is set in stone, and that's always impressed me with Chuck Smith in particular, because I think it's really hard to say, like, oh, this is better, instead of being like, oh no, we've already invested in MAP, and I did all this stuff, convincing you MAP was the best thing, and now you're like, but there's something else, and I think that we have to keep in mind that there's always going to be something else, and some of it's not going to be worth the while, but just the time that Chuck and Trudy and Eileen put into studying this program is, I think, just really positive, and, I just want to make those two comments, because I
Thank
think
you.
it just shows.
I appreciate that.
Great, thank you. Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I make one point about that? So I think in light of the conversations we've had over the last week, we have to take all of our staff and parents through a process, probably repeatedly, as we're talking about this, so it doesn't, appear as another new initiative or something else.
So I will be going to all of the PTAs at the middle school and the high school meetings to explain this, and then probably before that, also speak with the staff.
Yeah.
Great, and in support of the plug that Laura Schwem made earlier, parents need to get to the PTA meetings. So, great, we move on to the financial report. Thank you.
Thank you. Since time is moving on, I will make this as short as possible. There's not a huge change from last month, but there are a couple of things I'd like to point out. The end of January signals just beyond the midpoint of the school year. And if you look to the page where it shows the object codes, it's about the third page in, and you look at object code 1110 and 1111, those are the top two, and you look at the year-to-date expended versus the encumbrance, you'll notice the encumbrance is somewhat higher than the year-to-date. And a lot of people say, you got extra money encumbered, you got more money than you should have, and all that. What is really going on here is that the teachers have a clause in their contract where they can have 26 or 22 pays. And in June, we pay them out essentially 5 pays to carry them over the summer. So the encumbrance at this point in the year is always larger than what's gone out. And it's just the way it is. And it's because of the contract of the teachers that follows. So I want to make sure that nobody's looking at it and saying we have more money in our budget than we should have. So if you go through the categories, the 1000 series salaries, you see we're just a little bit over budget, but given the amount of money there, that's not significant. And believe it or not, we are turning over staff on a fairly regular basis, so that will probably ebb and flow. You move into the benefits column. There is slight bit of revenue coming in each month, and that $4,500 should disappear. And frankly, if we get a couple of, like if tuition reimbursement comes in like what it did last year, we will probably have a little extra money there. But it's hard to judge that. Moving on to the purchase professional services. We appear to be growing a little bit of money there, and I believe it will remain a balance unless something significant happens. It's in the 3310 line, and it's running much better than we expected it to. Purchase property services is pretty well balanced, having a small amount there. The 5,000 series accounts is obviously driven by out-of-district placements, and may or may not be offset by excess cost revenue from the state, depending on what happens in Hartford. The 6,000 series accounts are showing pretty well, and hopefully with this easy winter, at least so far, knock on wood, we might have a little extra balance there, and that balance may grow some. And we have a freeze on account, so most of the money in the equipment, except for what we're spending in technology to reinforce our network, we should have a fairly substantial balance there. And if you look at the bottom line of minus $631,000, that seems like a lot. However, if you look at last month's, we were in 800,000, so we're going in the right direction. And with that, I will close my comments on the financials and I'll open it up to questions.
So let's talk about the budget balance column.
Yes, sir.
How does that tie out compared to adjusted budget, estimated year end? If it was a cumulative number through the column, you would think that budget balance would be equal to the 631, not the 21,557. Why is that different?
Sorry, I'm not sure I'm following what you're saying. The balance is the minus 631.
Right, go two columns to the left.
Yes.
If that number is cumulative through all line items,
Well, that's because I'm projecting what the year-end balance would be, and that's whenever it says balance there, that's what it shows on the accounts. But historically, if you look at the accounts, we'll be more like projected year-end by the end of the year. And that will obviously change from month to month as we get better information.
okay, so you think the projected year end's gonna be 81,281?
That's correct.
Okay, and that, at that point, as the budget balance information gets more accurate, you'll think that number will be closer to negative 631?
I'm hoping we can do better than that.
Okay. Any other questions?
My assessment, based on being at this a long time, is what happens in the governor's office at this time of year is not likely to take place, but some of it is more than likely to take place. And what will affect this budget is what happens to how he handles the excess cost grant. Because our budget was built around approximately $1 million worth of revenue from the excess cost grant. And if that goes away, we will not be able to balance budget.
Understood. Other questions? Thank you very much. We now move on to review and discuss policy 1110.1, parent involvement.
All right, so there are 4 new policies up for review and discussion tonight. As you recall, back in July, we contracted with CABE to conduct an audit of our policy manual, and CABE came away with a series of recommendations. One of the recommendations was to address the mandated policies that are absent from our book. So this parent involvement policy reflects a mandated policy that we don't currently have. So it's a fairly straightforward policy. It just speaks to our desire to engage in partnership with parents and families, and to create opportunities to do that. And so, I mean, we have some existing, we're talking, about new ones, but this is kind of codifying what our commitment is to our families.
Did Kate give you references to the statutes?
To the ones that had statutes, yeah, so this one, it's here, it's 10.221.
I just checked it, it's not necessarily responsive. So there may be reasons why Kate thought it was a good idea, but some of these policies we're talking about are not actually required by statute. They may be good practice, they may be good reasons for it. So just if we can
I'll
get-
double check, Chris. I think the only one that we're looking at tonight that isn't bound by statute is the purchasing policy, 3323. The others, I'm fairly confident were.
Actually, one is just law, so it's not a policy, we don't have a choice about whether to follow the law, so. I just would wonder at the policy committee, whether we're really served by having lots of policies that just say we're gonna follow the law, or in other cases, if we think it's good practice, how we're actually going to use the policy. No one could argue with this policy, also no one can actually use it to really inform what we do. So it's both harmless and useless at the same time, which is okay, but it took people time and effort to go through it.
Can't argue with that logic.
Both harmless and useless
Right.
at the same time.
Well, I would argue that it's works towards our attempt at becoming better communicators, because parents are more likely to look up our policies
I think that-
than the state law,
Yeah.
I'm guessing our parents are not going to look up our policies or the state law. What we ought to do in communication is explain how we deliver great services to their kids. I'm not sure this policy is gonna help us, but.
Actually,
but
I
that's-
know parents who do look up for
Oh, okay, but maybe, I, as a board member, I'm not quite sure I would, actually, we've done a pretty good job the last 3 years without the policies, so. Go ahead, my point remains, and when we get to the others, I'll point out to the references,
Harmless and
they don't
useless at the same
exist, or it's
time.
just, the law requires it, so I'm not sure what
Because
we're
the
doing.
law requires it in most cases, yeah.
Thank you. Transportation safety complaints?
Right, so this was another one that was slated by CABE as a mandated policy, also referencing 10.221, but just clarifying that transportation complaints are directed through the transportation coordinator, and then through that we also have to provide information to the Commissioner of Motor Vehicles.
Questions, comments?
Did we do that already, though?
We do.
Okay.
Budget transfers?
Right, so this was one that, let me just make sure, also mandated policy. And there was, I think the question here around this policy, where I do think it will be beneficial to the board and the community, because it is changing practice. In the past, we haven't had a practice of bringing transfers to the board and exercising a mechanism for the board to approve statutes. That's the board's right and obligation to do that. So the policy reflects the change in practice. You can see in some of Dick's reporting, he's already started to capture some of that. So the intent here is to be more transparent in the changes we may make over the course of a year in how we direct dollars in our budget.
It's definitely a level of insight that we've not had in the past, so
Right.
it's
I don't
greatly
think that one's
appreciated.
mandated, though. I think
No,
that's
this is the law.
This one
So if
is,
you look
yes.
at
this is the law,
10.222,
okay.
this is
Correct.
what we just
Okay,
said
so- 'cause
here
I'm
is
looking at the
law.
audit.
So we-
All right.
whether we pass the policy or not, we.
Still
Still
follow the
obligated
law.
to do it,
I
right.
understand
So the policy reflects the law.
So maybe the policies, our policies ought to say we follow the law.
That's a good policy.
Because there are other places in the statute where it says we have to have a policy. So we need
Yes.
to have a written policy
Right.
on weighted grades.
Mhm.
We need to
Oh,
have a
so
written
first.
policy on transportation safety complaints. In this case, we're just following the law, so it's there.
Right.
It may make the administration of the policies easier. The policy committee is already burdened and they miss meetings, so it may just make their jobs easier.
I said I would suggest that maybe you should have brought this up before these policies were being presented to
I
us.
should have?
Yes,
Well, this is just now, it's just reviewing.
but they've already put the work into it.
Sorry, I just got it, I read the material.
So much of what we do on the board, we're volunteers. You know, we're like a volunteer fire department. We're not experts in these areas, so we have to draw on the insights and resources the professionals made available to us. Those include the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, who we draw on heavily, as well as legal counsel, and of course, the professionals that sit around this table. So there are definitely times where we don't necessarily understand the entire guidance of the professionals that are working on our behalf, but I have a hard time going against those professionals' guidance when they know more about that business than I do. Your points are well taken. I get them, and you make a great point. But at the same time, if we've got three sources saying you should do this, I have a hard time.
Maybe just next time you have a moment, ask them why.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. But that's like asking government why. So that aside, we're gonna get too philosophical. Other questions, comments on that one before we move on to the next? Are we done? Was that the?
No, we've got 3323 is the last one.
We have bids.
That's the competitive bidding process, and so this is a recommended policy.
Yeah, that's the one that's not long.
And this is, it's a policy absolutely worth entertaining. It reflects our practice. I think this is an area as an administration, as a board historically, where we can be more consistent. So it lays out just a series of procedures about how we take steps to be faithful to a competitive bidding process, both with bids and quotations. I believe, too, this aligns with the town's practice.
Questions, comments?
I would, I just suggest it's easier to over time amend practices than policies. So you might consider in the policy summarizing what the objective is, and then saving the details for implementation by the superintendent. I'm not quite sure we're going to advertise in newspaper publications anymore. We might actually do it online. I can't imagine we're actually gonna get sealed bids by USPS, and I'm not quite sure the value of that, and the list goes on. So you hamstring yourself, and you just invite the observation that you haven't exactly followed your own policy when it may not serve any use, and there may be plenty of circumstances where modifications make a lot of sense. So maybe the principle is we're looking to buy the best service at the most effective cost. How that actually gets done maybe should be subject to some degree of professional judgment by the superintendent and the ops people, the professionals that are doing the work.
I think that's a good point. One of the things that we are trying to do in the policy committee is make our policies a lot smaller, a lot shorter. And this is a pretty lengthy one, so I think
It's a blending of policy and reg,
Yeah.
because it stipulates how.
Right.
So that's a fair point.
Okay, thank you. And we now move on to the 2017-18 proposed budget. As everybody knows, we and the Board of Finance have put forth a number of questions which the administration has been working to address. All of those questions and answers thus far are up on the website. They're all in our documents as well. I don't intend to go through them one by one, and rather would like to ask each of the board members what questions they have still unanswered that would stand in the way of their feeling comfortable in making a vote this evening. Thoughts, comments, questions? Sir?
Question 36. Can you just split the, this is the what if question, if you're gonna spend $500,000 more or $1 million more?
Oh,
Can
yeah.
you split it, or just tell me what you would spend if you're gonna spend $1 million?
The other one.
Well, I presume all of those.
Yeah, I have to go.
Secondary supervisor, and Watson, and light analytics, and mathematics.
Right, I'm sorry, I'm not looking at it, so,
The question was if you could spend an extra $500,000 or $1 million, what would you do?
Mhm.
And there's just an enumeration, I presume the totality is what
Correct.
we might do if we had $1 million to spend.
yeah, I think so, just on that point, so some of the areas where we've deferred expenditures, we know that one of the needs we have is for additional administrative oversight of special education at the secondary level. When Heidi Carlin retired, and we brought Sharon D'Angelo on. One of our hopes was that she would be able to serve in a K-12 capacity, and just the demand and the kind of support she's providing both to families and to staff really limits her time availability to get to the high school. So that's a place where I think we've been trying to patch together and support, but it's certainly not what we'd want it to be. And so the second item you just referenced was we have been in conversation with, as you probably know, the folks from Office Depot, Office Max about an exclusive relationship they have with IBM to deliver this analytics platform using the Watson predictive technology. And so it's still very much in beta. There's one other district currently in the state that's working with them in development and application. But as we look at our vision and what we're trying to accomplish with kids around personalization, the potential of this tool is tremendous in really helping us get to a much deeper level of understanding about what kids need, what they're missing, and potential pathways in their learning. So that would be an area that, had we extra money, we'd want to look at investing there.
And the accelerated flooring replacement, how much is that of the million, do you know?
Say that again, what was it?
It says accelerated flooring replacement.
So the flooring is...
Yeah, did you just some guesses how much that is?
Yeah, well, I think what we were looking at originally in the budget was about annually a $200,000 expenditure, and I think that was there in the previous budget, and we might have pulled it out. So I would guess over a period of 5 years, we'd be looking at about $200,000 a year to stage it. The issue with that for me is because we've had transition, we know as you kind of move through the schools that we need to address flooring replacement. We just haven't committed to a plan, and in a number of conversations with Chris Burney, there are a few areas, all related to facilities where before we go ahead and recommend an expenditure, we need to really come up with a plan. So I think the point here is if the money was there, we would really kind of move forward in solidifying what that plan is going to be.
So if we take the other items that are enumerated, those would cost roughly $800,000, and the flooring replacement roughly $200,000?
More or less.
More or less.
Yeah.
And I have what I need. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Chris?
My questions have been answered.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, then we move on to action items. The first one is to discuss and vote on the STA contract extension. As you know, we have a contract renewal in front of us for the transportation company. We had a presentation at our last meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the contract extension?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion?
There was a question asked at last board meeting about what other contracts in the state of Connecticut they held. They have Greenwich, Danbury, Naugatuck, Region 17, and Griswold, aside from obviously Wilton.
Thank you. Chris?
Did we go out for a competitive bid on this?
We did not,
Okay.
and my understanding is our per seat mile through analysis is one of the lowest that we've been able to find. And the concern is if we went out to competitive bid, we would essentially be faced with perhaps increased costs.
Good, so that's a judgment. So I
Right.
think you would have just violated the policy on
The
bidding.
no, I was
Except
just
that
thinking
we don't have the
same
policy, and the board would have to approve a bid
There are
waiver.
exceptions at the end
Right.
of that policy. That say if it's too costly to bid out, then you don't have
I just
to.
want to prove I read this stuff. No, seriously though, that's exactly
Yeah.
why. It's
Yeah.
a perfect
No, you're right,
example
right. It's a
where
perfect
it doesn't
example.
make any sense at all, and now you're stuck explaining why you violated your own
Policy,
Right.
right. Mhm.
I think
Although
the
the-
assumption is, I don't know, I mean, we would have the board approve a bid waiver for this,
Yeah.
if that was the recommendation.
Oh, okay.
Although
Yes.
getting the per seat mile information out into the public domain in the spirit of transparency is a very good thing to do.
Got it.
And we did that at our previous meeting. Any further
Aye,
discussion?
yeah. Aye.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, we move on to the superintendent's 2017-18 proposed budget. As everybody knows, we've been looking at it for several weeks. It is a 0% increase in spending over previous budgets. I know that probably everybody at this table would like to be able to spend more than we have. We are.
So moved. Oops, sorry.
To spend more?
Spend more, you said
Yeah.
spend more.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to a point where you might actually vote aye instead of abstain or nay. So recognizing that the board would like to ultimately spend more, but we're not in a position to do that, I personally will make a motion to, I believe I can make a motion.
Why not?
Of course you can.
Yeah,
Of course
I'm gonna
you
make a
can.
motion that we approve this budget. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Yes.
I suggest that the administration's made a compelling argument that spending an extra $800,000 as enumerated in response to question 36 is compelling, and we ought to spend it. I took out the 200,000 on the flooring. I didn't feel particularly strongly about that. But the others seem to have a direct impact on the education of the kids in this community. And I think we make a mistake by not spending the money. So I would suggest you modify your resolution.
Is there a second to that?
Well, he hasn't. Have you made a motion, or are you just
Yeah, just
suggesting?
increase it by $800,000.
Yeah, he's
So
making
you're
it.
moving-
To cover that specific
Those specific
expense.
items.
He's gonna challenge my
No.
knowledge of Robert's Rules of Law. Is there a second to that motion?
I would second that.
Is there any further discussion?
I think it's a mistake to increase the budget at a time when we know that there is pressure in the town to go even lower than we have already done. The administration has worked incredibly hard to bring in the zero and deliver the education the kids need. I think raising it a penny more than zero is gonna open up a lot of unwelcome scrutiny by our colleagues on other boards.
I would echo that, especially in light of the fact that we do have to make a decision based on what we now know, not what may happen. We can reasonably assume that something will happen relative to the teacher's pension, relative to reimbursements that we've gotten through excess cost grant and educational cost sharing. And while I would love to see that money, I'd prefer to see a perhaps a concerted effort, maybe through maybe efforts on your part and maybe on yours to work with WEF to see if we could find those funds elsewhere. I would have a hard time with that, even though I get your point.
I think sometimes we presume to understand what the community wants based on limited input, and to suggest that the community would, on balance, encourage us to spend less rather than more may not be accurate. It may be accurate, but I'm not quite sure that that's true. I think there are many people in this room that would support spending more money, recognizing that it requires tax dollars to do so. And I know there are others that have presented to this board and have suggested we spend less money. But I must say, based on the available input and data, I don't conclude that it's clear that this community wants to spend less rather than more, as a community. Individuals, certainly, but not as an overall community.
I get that. It's just challenging to me, not only as a member of the board, but also as a community member, knowing that if the worst case scenario plays out, even at our zero budget, we're facing close to a 10% increase in property taxes. That's a tough nut to swallow. Other
You're talking
questions?
about the pension funding?
All of it.
Because with the pension, I mean, we either pay it in our state income tax or we're paying our property tax. I mean, we're paying for it no matter what, whether it's in the state budget or the town budget.
The assumption is that we're not going to get the money back
Yeah,
from
we're
the
paying for
state.
it again.
So we're paying for it twice.
That may not be exactly true. That requires a little more analysis, I think, before we reach that conclusion.
True. A vote on Mr. Straub's motion? And your second?
Well, I feel that I support the idea of what Chris suggested, but I don't know if I necessarily want to put it in the budget, but I think it's something that we should be focused on. There's some opportunities coming up with movements of people and that sort of thing that might give us an opportunity to look at that area. So, I don't know if that means I would withdraw my second?
No, you don't have to.
No? I don't know how the,
She can vote against it, even if she
Well,
seconded
okay,
it.
okay.
I'm
So-
sorry, what was that, Laura?
You're allowed,
Just
even
vote
if,
against
you
it.
can second a motion without supporting it,
Ah,
I mean, voting for it.
okay.
So, all in favor of Mr. Straub's motion?
Aye.
All opposed? Aye.
Aye.
We now move back to the original motion of approving the superintendent's budget as it stands. Are there any further discussions?
I just wanna say that, I mean, that's a painful situation to be in, and of course with the outside pressures with, you know, how we're gonna fund the teachers' pensions, and this isn't, you know, when you think about cutting, whether it's $800,000, I know you were talking about adding it in, but like, we're cutting 2.5 million or 4 million, and, you know, then you switch it the other way, like, what if we had that $800,000, and, you know, I just don't think this is the year to, we're already coming in over with the Board of Finance, and I actually think that we haven't heard enough from the community at all, and I think if the community's had this wide support out there, we would have already heard. You know, they would be letting us know already, and the fact that they're still really quiet, and, you know, if you know, the buzz around town seems to be primarily negative about the schools, which breaks my heart because I see how much hard work is being done by the administrators and the staff, and our kids are just amazing, like, you know, but I think we need to, I hate the fact that we're in this position of having a 0% budget increase, and there isn't any, you know, we're not just throwing it around and spending it unwisely and being disrespectful of the community. I just don't think this is the year to, I think we have to go with, I feel like we need to go with the budget that was presented to us by the superintendent.
I would, I'd echo your feelings, and I wish we had more. So,
And I would just reiterate what I said at a previous meeting when we were first discussing this, is that, you know, for this year, it's one thing, but going forward,
Right.
I would hate to see the town place all of the responsibility of the town's financial woes on the backs of the schools, when the schools are probably the best thing that this town has going for it. And if you can continue to put all the pressure on the financial back of the school, then you're gonna bring down its best asset. So I would hope that as we can go forward, we look for continuous investment in our schools and investment in our town's best asset.
And to that, if I may, I'm not sure that we're well-served as a community, and I'm not so sure we're serving well our students on a relative basis by increasing our spending at a rate less than the surrounding towns. To me, that's a reasonably definitive value judgment, and I would infer from that that other towns are willing to spend on the margin more than we are in the education of our children. That's not what I would support on a relative basis.
respect that opinion. Any further comments?
Do I have one more question before you ask
Sure.
the vote?
Yeah.
So you, Kevin, are still, based on the conversation tonight, recommending the budget as presented?
As presented.
Thank you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, it passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody. I know that wasn't easy.
Could've made it harder.
We appreciate that you did it.
For future business and information items, our next meeting is next Thursday, March 9th, here in this room. And in the report that we have and is online is the updated enrollment report. As we do at the beginning and end of every meeting, we have an opportunity for comments from the public. Seeing no public here, I look for motion to close the meeting.
So,
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's great discussion of And the viable
He's out.
request for more.
I'm saying you're fine, like next year.
And also, involvement with the PTA.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I
Yeah,
don't have often hear that from you.
And,
Hey, look, I understand you're a volunteer. The reason I make comments on policies and procedures is really to make it easier for the next sets of boards. And I don't expect you to do that work. I expect you to, as the superintendent and the staff, do that work